Welcome back to another episode of Revving Up with Revenge. I'm here with Julie Curry. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm super excited to dig in deep on how do we think about revenue operations in an organization where that is a brand new term, could have been speaking Latin. So I'll let Julie set it up for us.
Okay, let me set up our situation. We are an organization that had embraced revenue operations, albeit through a pretty narrow use case, in particular around our deployment of Salesforce. It had a very specific use case around revenue reporting, not necessarily around pipeline management, new business development, all other aspects that you typically want to use a Salesforce instance to be able to bring really good funnel analytics and obviously operation support to that. So Quang, you and I go back a ways because you were there at the beginning when we first started to figure out sales enablement was what we called it at the time. And enablement had a little bit too much of a passive tone to it because it was enabling perhaps processes that needed to be more operationally rigorous. We rebranded ourselves sales operations with the intent that what we were going to be building was more rigorous processes, tools, analytics, expectations for how we were going to step into the next chapter of sales operations. Some people call it RevOps, but it's all within that same family of being operationally rigorous.
I think you hit on a critical element, which is how do you package it? How do you present it? Right. And to an organization that has many different facets and some folks who may not want the idea of someone helping to redesign a process that they've executed for years. Talk us through that, Julie. The change management of something that is fundamentally different and may not be wanted in some pockets.
Well, there's two ways to enter an organization where you're going to be leading change agenda.
Yeah.
One is to come in and knock it all down and build it back up.
Yeah.
That wasn't going to be the culture that we were aiming for. We were aiming for getting people excited about getting on a train and moving that train to its station, so to speak. It starts with really understanding where we are. We spent a lot of time doing kind of internal persona research. At the end of the day, you have to know who your sellers are, who they sell today, how to make sure you're not disrupting what is working, because a lot of these sellers have very deep relationships that you don't want to disrupt. How do you choose where you want to make a difference and get early adopters in? So that was kind of our change management. It started with just knowing where we were meeting people, having a vision, but knowing where we were meeting people, and then slowly rolling out a series of actions, starting with Salesforce. What kind of base data, what kind of metadata was I going to need to put use cases on top of that data that will allow us to do prospecting more effectively? Integrated account management, integrated selling, all of these different use cases that tend to be sitting off of your CRM data, getting people excited about if you do this, then look at these use cases and tools that we can bring to you that will literally take you out of a spreadsheet, a 15-person phone call every week, and you're going to be able to do it in a more effective way.
What I've found in my career is whenever you can help a salesperson do less spreadsheet work, you've gotten
Exactly.
right.
Exactly.
Like, hey,
They love it.
love it, right? Especially sales leaders. I used to update this spreadsheet and it gives me this information like, hey, I'll do this for you. And then that's your in, right? You've now demonstrated value in a way that is concrete and takes away some pain.
A gentleman who works for me always boils it down to add value to a salesperson, you'll get them at hello. If you're not adding value, they're going to not say hello.
Yeah.
I always like that. It's a simple equation. Add value, come on into my door.
Yeah.
Not add value, door shut.
That's right. I think I know what you're talking about. I'm very curious. The persona work you did, Julie, what did it show? Like how many different personas were there? And was any of that a surprise to you when you looked at the folks on your team?
There were probably more personas than we wanted, but that was kind of deliberate because we really wanted to understand a day in the life.
Yeah.
And we have a pretty dispersed sales organization, both product selling as well as solution selling. Yeah. Folks who have been here a short amount of time, folks who have been here a long amount of time. So it was really important for us to understand each one of those pods of sellers so that when we came out and made recommendations, we were prescriptive about, okay, a person who's this type of seller, our expectation is you're going to go from A to B. Some sellers, you're not going to go anywhere. Just keep doing what you're doing. I'll provide somebody around you to actually put stuff in your spreadsheet because the work you're doing with your customers is so valuable that I don't want to distract you. But the more we started hiring people from the outside and the more we started hiring earlier career salespeople, you really had to meet them where they were. which they have an expectation that they're going to have the tools to be an effective seller. So yeah, we had to create that balance. And over time, I think we're finding a good medium.
Yeah. I applaud you in so many ways because you're truly putting the customer of sales ops at the center of it, right? Where so often what we see is you build a process, you're like, this is the best process. Everyone should adhere to
Yeah,
it.
look at this.
And everyone needs to
Yeah.
do exactly these 29 steps. And then leaders get frustrated when no one does it, right? Or very few. I think it misses what you just hit on, which is understanding. I mean, at the end of the day, whether you're revenue operations or a new product or a new division, any sort of changes, it's a human thing. And humans need to change. We're adept at changing, but change should also be thought of as science. So that's, again, great that you did that.
Maybe it was born out of some earlier experiences I had working in more private equity oriented cultures where it was a little more direct in its
Yeah.
expectations. And it can be great short term, but we have a very long term perspective on our
Yep.
business. Everything we're doing has to grow roots.
Yeah.
It has to grow roots, and it has to grow roots in a way that is going to actually have flowers blooming. And so that's also kind of a luxury that we have here
Yeah.
because we have a long term kind of perspective on the business.
Yeah. Maybe expand on that a bit more, Julie. When you say grow roots, what does that look like for you and Quad?
Well, I think it's something as simple as how do you want to use Salesforce, right? What are your expectations relative to your sellers and how they're engaging with your CRM system? If you haven't really invested in getting to that stage, you're just going to put junk on top of junk, right? The worst thing that you can do as a leader, as a sales ops department, is to start making conclusions about opportunities around your pipeline, around your forecast, and then have a asterisk next to those conclusions because now you have to explain the data underneath it.
Yeah.
You got to get the butt out of the equation. So that's to me what an example of growing roots is that, well, don't go to the next step until you're confident that you've got the base done well, you've fertilized it.
If fixing a spreadsheet issue for a sales leader is the best thing you can do, the worst thing you do is show up with a recommendation based off of data that you can't explain. I've never seen that go well. It has to be, and I think that's where sales operation professionals can really excel, which is doing that work, translating the data and having an understanding, right? So they're not purely finance folks, they're not operation folks, they're that connective tissue. That's a super helpful explanation. Thank you for that.
It goes back to also, if you do it well, then your salespeople are starting to use the analytics and the
Yeah.
tools to be curious about where's the next opportunity.
Yeah.
Where am I learning about what's working, what's not working? And then that just becomes a network effect. And if each of your sales team members wondering and trying to explore their own data or their data around them, then they just become more effective at their job. And so it's also just a requirement to get this network effect of sellers looking for the next opportunity as opposed to us sitting at the center saying, hey, did you think about going into these 5 customers? You don't want to be pushing that type of intel. You want your sales reps to be pulling it so that they're very proactively saying, hey, what about those 5 customers? I think there's an opportunity. Let me go engage with them.
It sounds like you've been really able to tap sales operations as a strategic lever versus, I've even heard sales ops referred to as sales accounting. It's because it's necessary. Someone has to do the books for sales, which is sales ops a strategic lever for you nowadays?
Oh, absolutely. I know I've spent a little bit of time talking about the base we've created using the data, but then it's the applications that we've built on top of it that are now inspiring the sales organization. It's been a mechanism to drive our transformation of selling a big portfolio like we have and helping sellers be really comfortable and confident going out and representing that portfolio. It's something as simple as, whether you're doing conversational intelligence. Now, I can apply conversational intelligence tools or I can apply AI tools now to that data. And all of a sudden, folks are like, oh my gosh, just with a point of a button, I can do all my meeting notes because now I've kind of built an infrastructure and ecosystem around that. And when you get to that level, it's not just an accounting, it's really an enabler. And so then maybe I'll go all the way around where I started, where we were sales enablement, because now we're enabling people to be truly the best salesperson that they can be.
Wow. It's amazing. Yeah. And I agree. It feels like now it's just pushes of buttons that gives you rich context and insight, just executing tasks that were once very much human. For a bulk of my earlier career as a consultant, my primary job was taking notes.
Oh, yeah,
I
yeah,
was
yeah, yeah.
rewarded for how verbose and how accurate my notes were. And it's like by hand, you know?
We're dating ourselves, Quang. We're dating ourselves.
Oh man, I'd love to just get your insights. And this is something I believe is still very unique to Quad is you provide earlier career employees a chance to experience sales, sales ops, product, giving them such a well-rounded experience, right? And diversity. What's your view on that? One could argue, wow, you're like, that's inefficient, right? Because someone's getting experience in a field that they may never see again. And others can say that's brilliant because you're really developing future leaders that have cross-functional expertise and even relationships. So yeah, I'm curious for your thoughts on that model.
One of the beautiful things that I found when I joined Quad was this Quad training
Yeah.
program that has been in place, I think, 50 years. It was started by Harry Quadracci, who was the founder of Quad. It was just a real commitment to bringing people into the organization, moving them around to different roles, and then graduating them on a career path. And it usually takes about 2 years or so. But, many companies have a training program, but this one was super special because the companies never blinked on that investment. We never have said, a lot of companies, your training programs go up and down depending on where your forecast and your budgets are. We've never blinked on that. And so the beauty of that is it's a real interest to kids that are just coming out of school because they have an opportunity to keep learning. You asked me in the last episode what got me into revenue account management. If I had a 2-year training program, who knows whether I would have been here because I might have gone around the block a little bit and found something that was equally interesting. We let the kind of young career folks do that. And then there's a tremendous amount of support among us to compete for these assignments. We really like having these trainees as part of our team because they're thinking differently. They're unencumbered with anything relative to how it used to be done. And they're helping us and pushing us and thinking about new things. And it's a great community that we develop around that. And then we're always campaigning for those that we think have a sales aptitude. Not everybody wants to be in sales, but those that have a sales aptitude and sales interest, then we can place them to say, okay, go take a rotation over here. Because then when you come out a year and a half, 2 years from now, you're going to hit the ground running. And it makes it much more valuable to that leader
Yeah.
because they've had 2 years of experience getting there. So they've learned probably all the tools. They understand the lingo. They understand how to approach a sales conversation. And then they can get into getting it done.
Did I hear you right that other leaders are competing for this pool of trainees? Wow.
We have to put a business case together for
Oh,
what we're going to do for these trainees so that we're giving them the learning experience we want them to be experiencing.
wow.
We definitely have to have a business case around what we're going to do with the trainee.
One would imagine on the surface, like, well, man, this is a burden, right? I got this trainee who's going to have to learn. And it sounds like it's the inverse of that. It's a true value add for everyone.
Yeah.
Well, that's all we have for now, but we'll be right back with predictions from Julie. We are back with Julie Curry to give her hot take on how the landscape is changing. What's your prediction for the rest of 2025 and anyone in go-to-market?
You might think that nobody wants to disrupt sales. Trust me, it's being disrupted. As evidenced by the fact that we all get sold to. How many of you know whether you're being sold to a bot or by some sort of automation, or are you being sold to by Johnny who's on the other side of that email? It could be both, right?